The world ends in whispers. For Sarah Jenkins, it ended in a crackle of static, a hiss of dead air that held more terror than any scream. As a 911 dispatcher, she was an anchor in a sea of chaos, her voice a lifeline cutting through panic and pain. But a single call had unmoored her, leaving her adrift in a quiet guilt that gnawed at her during the long, silent hours of the night shift. Now, a new sound has begun to bleed through her headset, a patterned, unnatural static that arrives moments before tragedy strikes, a chilling prelude to disaster. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The hum of the dispatch center was a familiar lullaby of low-grade anxiety. Banks of glowing monitors painted Sarah Jenkins' face in shades of blue and amber, her reflection a stoic mask amidst the flickering maps and call logs. It was 3:17 a.m. The city, for a moment, was holding its breath. Sarah's world was a symphony of controlled chaos, a constant triage of human misery funneled through the thin wire of her headset. She was good at it. Her voice was a steady, calming instrument that could soothe a panicked parent or command a frantic bystander with practiced authority. But in the quiet moments, another sound echoed in her memory, a ghost that lived in the space between heartbeats. The multi-car pileup on I-5 6 months ago. The memory was a shard of glass in her mind, sharp and unavoidable. She could still hear the frantic, tinny voice of the woman pinned in her sedan, the cries of a child in the background. The on-ramp at Mercer is blocked, a truck overturned. Sarah had instructed the ambulance, her voice the epitome of professional calm. Reroute to Fairview, it's the clearest path. It wasn't. An earlier, minor accident hadn't been cleared. Those precious seconds lost. The line had gone silent before the paramedics arrived. The official review cleared her. It was an unforeseen complication, a cascade of bad luck. But Sarah knew. She had made the call, she had chosen the path. In the silence of her lonely apartment, she could still hear the child's cries fading into the hiss of an open line. The guilt was a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of her life. Emergency services workers are at a high risk of developing PTSD, a fact she knew clinically but now understood viscerally. The quiet of the center was broken only by the soft whirring of computer fans. In that pocket of silence, nestled between a resolved domestic dispute and whatever horror the next minute held, she heard it. It wasn't the usual ambient hiss of the equipment or the faint crosstalk from another channel. This was different. Through her headset, a burst of complex, rhythmic static crackled to life. It was structured, almost digital, like a corrupted data file or a language she couldn't comprehend. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds, a sharp, intricate pattern of pops and snaps, and then vanished, leaving behind the familiar, empty hum. She blinked, tapping the side of her headset. A glitch? Solar flares? She was about to dismiss it when a light on her console flashed crimson. Line 3. She pressed the button, her training taking over. 911, what is your emergency? The voice on the other end was a strangled gasp. Oh my God, the street, it's gone. Sir, I need you to calm down. Tell me your location. I'm on 4th and Blanchard. A car was right in front of me, and the road just opened up. It swallowed it. There's a giant hole. The car is just gone. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, her voice steady as she dispatched police, fire, and medical. Sir, are you in a safe location? I need you to stay on the line with me. She guided him, soothed him, extracted every necessary detail with robotic precision. But as she coordinated the response, a cold dread trickled down her spine. 4th and Blanchard was 3 blocks from the dispatch center. The call had come in the instant the strange static faded. A chilling, impossible coincidence. Outside, the first sirens began to wail, a sound she heard every night. But tonight, it didn't sound like a rescue. It sounded like a reply. For 2 nights, the ghost in her headset remained silent. Sarah tried to rationalize what she'd heard, blaming it on a faulty wire, a power surge, anything that fit neatly into the logical world she inhabited. A 911 dispatcher's job is to impose order on chaos, to find patterns in panic. An unexplainable sound that preceded a disaster didn't fit any protocol. She was just tired, burnt out. The job took its toll. Almost a third of first responders develop PTSD. Then, on the third night, it happened again. The call volume was low, the air thick with the pre-dawn stillness. A new burst of static erupted in her ear. This one was different from the first, a rapid, stuttering pulse followed by a long, low crackle, like ice splitting under pressure. Her breath caught in her throat. Her hand hovered over the console, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Seconds later, a call lit up her board. A woman's hysterical voice screamed about an explosion. "My neighbor's house, it just blew up. There's fire everywhere." The address was in a quiet, residential neighborhood miles away. Coincidence, she told herself, but the word felt hollow, a lie. It happened a third time the following week. A sharp, whining static that climbed in pitch before abruptly cutting off. Immediately after, a frantic construction foreman was on the line, his voice cracking as he reported a crane collapsing at a downtown high-rise project. 3 bursts of static, 3 unique patterns, 3 unforeseen disasters. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a prelude. Her dispatcher's instinct, the part of her brain that saw connections and anticipated needs, took over. She couldn't tell her supervisor. They'd think she was cracking under the pressure, another casualty of the job's immense stress. So she began to work in secret. Using a simple splitter and a handheld recorder, she started capturing the audio feed from her headset, a breach of protocol that could cost her the job. In a small notebook, she logged everything: the date, the time, a hand-drawn visualization of the static's rhythm, and the nature of the emergency that followed, a grim ledger of impossible foresight. She had to rule out the logical. During a quiet moment on shift, she flagged down Marcus, the station's affable IT technician. "Hey Marcus, can you take a look at my console when you have a second? I've been getting some weird audio artifacts, like interference." Marcus gave her a weary smile. "Probably just crosstalk from the PD's new encrypted channel. I'll run a diagnostic." He plugged a tablet into her station, his fingers tapping across the screen. He ran a full check, testing the line, the headset jack, the console's internal sound card. After 20 minutes, he unplugged his device and shrugged. "She's clean as a whistle, Sarah. No packet loss, no hardware faults, no detectable interference. Whatever you're hearing, it's not the equipment." He walked away, leaving Sarah staring at her console. The lights blinked back at her, steady and mundane, offering no answers. The technician's all clear was not a relief, it was terrifying. It confirmed the source wasn't in the wires or the circuits, it was somewhere else. She was alone with the sound, alone with the impossible knowledge that the static was a harbinger and the city was its unknowing victim. The flashing waveform on her laptop screen was a jagged, alien landscape. In the spare bedroom of her apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of her computer, Sarah spent her off hours obsessing over the recordings. The static bursts, so brief and chaotic in real time, became something more when she slowed them down. Using a free audio editing program, she stretched the seconds into minutes, magnifying the intricate architecture of the noise. That's when the true horror revealed itself. Hidden within the crackle and hiss were other sounds, distorted and warped by time. In the recording before the sinkhole, when she slowed the audio by 2,000%, she could hear it, a low, groaning complaint of stressed metal and schisting earth, the sound a car's chassis might make just before being crushed. In the static preceding the gas explosion, there was a faint but unmistakable whoosh of escaping gas, followed by a high-frequency click. And in the recording from the crane collapse, slowed to a crawl, she heard the terrifying shriek of metal cables snapping under immense strain, a sound that lasted only a fraction of a second in real time, but was now a drawn-out scream. She pushed her chair back from the desk, a cold sweat beading on her forehead. The static wasn't a message from someone. It was the message. It was the sound of the future tragedy itself, an auditory echo imprinting on the present. A terrifying hypothesis began to form in her mind, a blend of science fiction and stark reality. A powerful, chaotic future event, a moment of intense energy release and trauma, was somehow sending a ripple backward through time, a temporal feedback or causality static. Her headset plugged into the nexus of the city's emergency communications and maybe her own mind, hyper-attuned to the frequency of disaster after the I-5 pileup, was acting as a receiver. She was the only one who could hear the city's screams before they happened. On the ground, someone else was noticing the impossible. Officer David Miller, a veteran cop with 20 years on the force, had a calm demeanor that belied a sharp, observant mind. He was the kind of cop who knew the rhythm of his beat, the subtle shifts in atmosphere that signaled trouble. And lately, the dispatches from Jenkins had been uncanny. One night, she'd routed him to check on a stalled vehicle at an intersection a full minute before a frantic call came in about a street race that ended in a crash at that very spot. Another time, she'd advised a fire truck to take a longer route to a house fire, only for them to learn that the faster route had been blocked by a sudden water main break that hadn't even been reported yet. Her hunches were saving precious seconds. They were making him look good, but they were also spooking him. After his shift, he called her on her private line, bypassing the recorded dispatch channels. "Jenkins," he said, his voice low, "it's Miller. We need to talk." "Officer, is everything all right?" Sarah's professional tone was automatic. "Cut the protocol, Sarah. What's going on? Your hunches have been a little too good lately. It's one thing to be good at your job. It's another thing to be a psychic." His tone wasn't accusatory, but it was edged with a deep, unnerving curiosity. He was the first person to see the pattern from the outside, and she knew she couldn't lie to him. The next static burst came during a hectic Tuesday night shift. It was a chaotic splinter of sound, sharper than the others, and within it, Sarah's blood ran cold. She could parse two distinct, horrifying elements: the high-pitched, terrified scream of a young child and the cheerful electronic chime of the crosswalk at Pike and 8th Avenue. A pedestrian was about to be hit. Panic seized her. She couldn't dispatch a car to a crime that hadn't happened yet. Possible traffic collision about to occur wasn't a valid call. She would be suspended, sent for a psych evaluation. The system wasn't built for this. But the sound of that child's scream was a physical thing, clawing at her from the inside. The memory of the child on the I-5 call flooded back. Another child she couldn't help. Not this time. Breaking every rule in the book, she bypassed the main dispatch and called Officer Miller's direct line. Her voice was tight, stripped of its usual calm. "Miller, it's Jenkins. I need you at Pike and 8th, now." "What's the call?" he asked, his voice already betraying his suspicion. I don't have one yet, just a bad feeling. A report of reckless driving in the area. Please, just get there." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. But there was a raw urgency in her voice that transcended protocol. "On my way," he said, the sound of his siren chirping to life in the background. Miller trusted his gut, and his gut told him to trust the desperate edge in Sarah's voice. He sped to the intersection, arriving just as the crosswalk signal began to flash. He saw a young boy, no older than 7, dart into the street after a dropped toy, his mother shouting behind him. At the same time, a black sedan, its driver clearly texting, blew through the red light. For Miller, time seemed to slow down. He didn't think, he reacted. He leapt from his car, grabbing the child by the back of his jacket and pulling him onto the sidewalk an instant before the sedan rocketed through the space where he had been standing. The car screeched to a halt half a block down the street. The mother was sobbing, clutching her son. Miller was a hero. But he was also deeply, profoundly unnerved. Later that night, he met Sarah in the empty parking lot behind the dispatch center. The city lights cast long shadows around them. "You couldn't have known that, Sarah," he said, his voice flat. "Not the location, not the timing, not like that. I want the truth." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, born of terror and a strange, desperate relief. She had saved someone. The static wasn't just a curse. Looking at the weary, trustworthy face of the veteran cop, she saw no other choice. She told him everything about the static, the recordings, the slowed-down sounds of disaster, about the groaning metal, the snapping cables, and the impossible theory of a temporal echo. She expected him to laugh, to walk away, to report her. Instead, Miller stood in silence for a long time, looking up at the blinking lights of the city. He had seen too much in his career, things that defy easy explanation, moments of pure dumb luck and chilling coincidence. What she was describing was impossible, but he had just pulled a child from the path of a speeding car because of it. "I don't know what to believe," he said, finally, his voice raspy, "but I saw what I saw. I'll be your man on the ground. You get a warning, you call me, directly. We'll be cautious, but we'll figure out what the hell is going on." In the lonely, claustrophobic world of her secret, Sarah finally had an ally. With Miller as her eyes and ears on the ground, Sarah's secret mission gained focus. They were no longer just reacting, they were investigating. After each event, Miller would provide detailed on-site reports, which Sarah would cross-reference with her recordings. On a large map of the city pinned to her apartment wall, she began marking the locations of the disasters. A pattern quickly emerged. The incidents weren't random at all. They were occurring in a deliberate, expanding spiral, moving outward from a central point in the city's old, neglected industrial district near the port. As the events spiraled closer to that center, the nature of the static changed. It grew more complex, more polluted. Underneath the now familiar pre-echoes of disaster, the groan of failing infrastructure, the hiss of a ruptured pipe, a new layer of sound began to surface. It was faint at first, but it was undeniably there. A low, rhythmic, almost meditative humming. And beneath that, even more chillingly, the distorted, sibilant whisper of a human voice. It wasn't speaking words she could understand. It sounded more like a mantra or a chant repeated over and over. The static wasn't just an echo of a tragic accident anymore. It was an echo of an action. This horrifying realization shifted everything. These events weren't accidents. With Miller's help, she dug into municipal records. The sinkhole had occurred above a new subway excavation site where geological surveys had been falsified. The gas line that exploded was ancient, poorly maintained, and scheduled for replacement years ago. The crane that collapsed had a history of documented safety violations that had been mysteriously signed off on. Someone wasn't planting bombs or causing destruction with overt force. They were finding the city's weakest points, the hairline fractures in its infrastructure, the rot hidden behind bureaucratic paperwork, and giving them a final, catastrophic push. The method was unknown, but the intent was clear. This was calculated. This was murder. And the whisper chant she heard in the static? It was the sound of the perpetrator. It was the sound of the person responsible, captured at the very moment they set the disaster in motion. The temporal feedback wasn't just carrying the sound of breaking steel and shattering glass. It was carrying the sound of the hand that was breaking the world. The humming, the whispering, it was the auditory signature of the killer. The mystery of a supernatural phenomenon had twisted into the grim reality of a manhunt. The story was no longer just about hearing the future, it was about stopping the man who was creating it. Sarah and Miller were now a clandestine two-person task force, operating in the shadows of official procedure. Their spiral map was their oracle. By extrapolating the trajectory, they could predict the next likely target area, a decaying section of the waterfront filled with abandoned warehouses and crumbling piers. Their investigation became a race against the clock and the static. They spent hours cross-referencing city engineering reports, utility maintenance logs, and condemned building files, searching for the next point of critical failure within that zone. Was it an old water tower with a rusted foundation, a substation with a history of transformer failures, a structurally compromised pier? Every potential disaster was a breadcrumb leading them closer to their quarry. As they hunted, they built a profile of the man they were after. He wasn't a terrorist. There were no manifestos, no political demands, no credit taken for the destruction. The targets had no symbolic value. They were simply weak. This person wasn't trying to make a statement. He was, in a twisted way, a purist. "He's an entropy worshiper," Sarah murmured one night, staring at the map. "Someone who believes the natural state of the universe is decay. He's not causing the rot, he just believes he's helping it along. An agent of collapse." Miller, a man used to dealing with motives of greed, revenge, or passion, found this philosophical motive far more terrifying. How do you stop someone who sees themselves not as a killer, but as a helper of inevitable disasters? The answer came in the most terrifying way imaginable. Sarah began her next shift, the familiar weight of the headset settling over her ears. She braced herself for the now expected intrusion. The static hit her like a physical blow. It was louder, clearer, and more intimate than ever before. There was no need to slow this recording down. The rhythmic, meditative humming filled her ears, a resonant bass that seemed to vibrate in her teeth. The whispered chant was perfectly clear, a sibilant rush of air that sounded like it was spoken directly into her ear. She heard the pre-echo of the next disaster, the deep groaning of stressed concrete, the sharp crack of fracturing steel supports. It was a building. And then she heard another sound, one that bypassed her brain and went straight to ice in her veins. It was a sound she heard a dozen times a shift, a sound so mundane it was almost invisible. It was the specific electronic chime of the front door to the 911 dispatch center itself. The next target wasn't miles away. It was here. It was her. The killer was in the building. The world narrowed to the sound in her ears, the chant of the killer and the death groan of the building she was in. He was in the basement, she realized, sabotaging the primary structural supports. Panic was a wild animal clawing at her throat, but she shoved it down. A dispatcher's primary tool is control. Pulling the fire alarm was the obvious choice, but it was the wrong one. It would create a stampede, chaos, exactly the kind of entropy the perpetrator worshipped. He might even be counting on it. She had to communicate the danger silently. The climax was not a chase or a fight, but a tense, silent game of cat and mouse played across a network of circuits and screens. While the man below worked to bring the world down, Sarah worked to hold it together. Her fingers danced across her console, her face a mask of professional calm. To her colleagues, she was just handling the evening's flow of emergencies. In reality, she was orchestrating a silent alarm, a masterpiece of misdirection. She couldn't send an all-units call to her own address without causing a panic. Instead, she began dispatching with surgical precision. A silent panic alarm was triggered from the sheriff's substation 2 floors up, coded as a high-level security breach. She routed a fire engine to a hydrant check directly across the street, a low-priority but plausible command that would put them in position. She created a ghost call, a phantom report of a major multi-vehicle collision 2 blocks away, rerouting every available patrol car in the vicinity, effectively creating a dragnet around their own building. Each command was a coded message, a piece of a puzzle she prayed Miller would solve. On the outside, Miller, listening on his radio, saw the flurry of seemingly routine but strangely clustered dispatches. He saw the pattern instantly. It was the spiral from their map, but this time it was contracting, tightening around a single point, the dispatch center. He got on the radio. "All units converging on downtown incident. Be advised. Potential secondary situation at dispatch HQ. Approach with caution. Radio silence." The perpetrator, down in the concrete heart of the building, must have felt the vibrations of the approaching sirens, or perhaps his phone buzzed with news alerts. Realizing the police were converging far too quickly, he abandoned his work. He had to neutralize the source of the interference, the nexus of the city's order. He came up from the basement, his face grimy with concrete dust, and entered the hushed, glowing dispatch center. He saw her immediately, Sarah, headset on, bathed in the light of her monitors. He walked towards her, a crowbar hanging from his hand. The other dispatcher stared, frozen. The standoff was surreal. The man of chaotic sound, who worshipped decay, stood before the woman whose entire life was about controlled signals and holding things together. He opened his mouth to speak, to share his twisted gospel. "It's a beautiful sound, isn't it?" he whispered, his voice the sibilant rush from the static. The sound of things becoming what they're supposed to be. Broken. Sarah didn't answer. She simply held his gaze, her hand resting on her console, and keyed her mic one last time for Miller's ears only. "Target is on site. He's here." The doors burst open. Miller and his team stormed the center in a whirlwind of tactical gear and drawn weapons. The confrontation was brief and decisive. The perpetrator, a man lost in a philosophical abyss, offered little resistance. He was just a man, stripped of his mystery and power, as Miller cuffed him and led him away. Moments after they cleared the main floor, a deafening roar echoed up from the basement. The section of the building directly above the sabotage supports gave way, a cascade of concrete and steel collapsing in on itself. Thanks to Sarah's silent, unconventional evacuation of non-essential personnel to a briefing in a safer wing, no one was seriously injured. In the aftermath, amidst the dust and flashing lights, Sarah was hailed as a hero. They lauded her for her quick thinking, her grace under pressure, her ingenious use of the dispatch system to avert a greater tragedy. No one knew the real story. No one knew she hadn't just been thinking, she had been listening to the future. With the entropy worshipper captured, the source of the powerful temporal echoes was gone. The next time Sarah put on her headset, the silence was absolute. The static had returned to its normal state, a meaningless, gentle hiss. The hums, the whispers, the pre-echoes of tragedy, they were gone. The chime was silent. The burden she had carried for months, the terrible weight of knowing, was lifted. The experience changed her. The burnout, the gnawing guilt over the I-5 crash had been scoured away by the fire of her ordeal. She had faced the sound of the worst possible moments, the sonic ghosts of death and destruction, and had not only survived, but had used her skills to fight back. Her hearing, once a source of trauma, had become her greatest strength. She had a renewed sense of purpose, a deep, abiding understanding of her role as a guardian of the city's fragile peace. Months later, Sarah sat at her console during the busy Saturday night shift. The familiar symphony of calls and dispatches filled the air. A light flashed. 911, what is your emergency? A young mother's worried voice came on the line. Her child had fallen from a playset. It was a routine call, an everyday emergency, the kind of crisis that happened 100 times a day in a city of millions. Sarah dispatched the ambulance with her calm, professional voice, giving the mother pre-arrival instructions with practiced ease. After the call ended, she leaned back in her chair, listening to the quiet, empty hiss in her headset in the space between calls. She closed her eyes. For the first time in a very long time, the silence was just silence. It held no warnings, no ghosts, no echoes of what was to come. It was simply an absence of noise. And it was a beautiful sound. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.